Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Carpenter Critique. My name is Luke Carpenter. I will be your host. If this is your first time, welcome. If this is your second time, welcome back. And if this is your third time, then I guess you're obsessed with me. I'm so excited. We're on episode 15. We're going over the TV show Hacks on HBO. I guess first some updates about me. I'm actually flying to California to see my grandma and also for my dad's graduation. He's graduating with his doctorate. Big deal. So I'm leaving tomorrow, so I have to film a few episodes in preparation before the big trip, but I'm still going to give you that critique. I'm going to give you the YouTube video. I'm going to give you the Spotify listening, recording. Yeah, all the things. I'm so glad to have you here. Thank you for being a part of the Carpenter Critique journey. And yeah, I'm excited to see where this episode goes, especially because this is one of my favorite shows. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I love Hacks. My friend Cole, shout out Cole, he's on the website, is actually the person who recommended the show to me. It was around season 2, so a couple of years ago when it was first coming out. And now it's blown up into this huge culture phenomenon. It's just finished its 5th season, its final season actually, last Sunday. So I'm so sad it's over, but also I think it's a really smart move by the writers. It was a great show. And honestly, every single season was great. Every single season was great. And how many TV shows can say that? They started great, in the middle it was great, and ended great. So that is awesome. I cannot wait to dive into it. I'm going to pull up a little synopsis for us. Hacks is an Emmy-winning Max dark comedy drama that explores the unlikely mentorship and working partnership between Deborah Vance, a legendary demanding Las Vegas comedian, played by the wonderful Jean Smart, I love her so much, and Ava Daniels, a canceled 25-year-old entitled comedy writer hired to refresh Deborah's dated stand-up routine. The series was created and written by Lucia Agnello, Paul W. Downs, who I love and is also starring on the show, and Jen Statsky, and it spans 5 seasons. They just wrapped, like I said earlier, they just wrapped their 5th and final season. So sad, but also what a satisfying conclusion. I cannot wait to talk about it. So, in season 1, that was basically the synopsis for the first season. So, it's Ava Daniels getting canceled in LA, and so her manager then sends her to Vegas to work with Deborah Vance, who is a famous comedian, but kind of past her prime, is what everybody said. And so Ava and Deborah kind of team up, and it's a really, really fascinating partnership of older comedy versus like Gen Z millennial comedy, and what works for who and what. Deborah's a mentor, but in the final season, it's definitely like they're each other's best friend. And I would say it works so well because Deborah wants the spotlight. She is a star. But Ava Daniels doesn't really want the spotlight, but she wants things to be right and just. It's such a great parallel between these two characters. I know that they found Jean Smart pretty fast to play Deborah Vance. She's the older character. She's about in her 60s, for those who haven't seen it, or late 50s, early 60s when the show starts. And Ava Daniels is a comedy writer who is about 25, 26 when the show starts. And so there's a pretty big generational gap, but over time they slowly become best friends. They kind of mentor each other. They console each other through really hard things, but also they remain writer and performer, and they're constantly riffing off of each other. And one thing, I mean, the show is completely funny throughout. I've laughed out loud so many times watching the show. I watch it with my good friend Shaylee. Shout out Shaylee if she's watching. She's probably not. She's probably sleeping. I've recommended it to so many people because it's very insightful and everybody can find themselves in one of the characters. I definitely see myself in the character played by Paul W. Downs. He's the manager of the 2 girls or the 2 women. I think it's a really interesting contrast too between what is politically correct now versus what is seen as woke, maybe. They really do have 2 opposite sides of the spectrum. Deborah Vance is very wealthy, probably would vote. She's like really like wants gay rights though too. They're probably both liberal, but there's definitely some conservatism that comes when you have wealth and age versus, I think, what a great contrast to that is a young liberal, very liberal woman who is bisexual and open and fluid with her sexuality, but also her emotions. There is a lot of times when it seems like Deborah is very rigid in her emotions and Ava is so emotional that it kind of brings the two together. Also, they balance each other out, which is really, really awesome. I love when Deborah Vance calls Ava her voice. That's the best. But it also takes time. What I really, really love about the writing is that it's a relationship that takes a lot of effort. Their friendship, their mentorship, whatever you want to call it, takes a lot of time to build. They're not each other's biggest fan right off the bat. And in fact, they kind of hate each other, but they know that they make each other better. And because they stick together for so long, they're still together in the very end. And yes, I am going to talk about the spoilers of this series finale. If I'm going to spoil the show for you at all, if you're going to watch it, please don't listen to a lot of what I'm about to say. Maybe skip to like minute 15. So we're going to start in season 1, where the premise is Deborah's casino residency is in jeopardy due to stale material, while 25-year-old Ava is universally blacklisted for a tone-deaf tweet that she made. So Ava moves to Vegas to help Deborah, and because they share management, are forced to work together. They initially clash over their comedic styles and generational differences, but they gradually build a begrudging respect for one another. Ava pushes Deborah to write edgier, more personal material, while Deborah grounds Ava. I loved season 1. The formation of the friendship, they really do butt heads in the beginning. I think they both would call each other entitled. They would both call each other full of it. But the partnership, because it's so different, it works so well. Then we go to season 2, where they hit the road. After writing all the new material, it's time for them to really start testing out the material on different audiences. They want to refine the jokes, so they hit the road. This might be my favorite season just because they're on the road. There's so much potential for comedy. They do riff off of each other. And I know the writers were having such a blast writing the jokes that could have been, but weren't. Yeah, it just seems really, really fun. Also, they had all these interesting characters. And when you're living with people on the road, you know, everywhere you go, there you are. And so the personalities clash over and over. And I really, really enjoyed it. I think season 2 is where some of the best writing comes to play, but also probably some of the funniest jokes of the entire series are in season 2. In season 3, we start to notice that Deborah has always had this goal of being a late night host. There has never been a woman late night host. And so Deborah aims to be the first female late night host ever. And Ava thinks that she can do it. And so she starts writing. They refine the material. They come out with comedy specials. And season 3 is where they are building towards making the pitch that she'll be the first ever female late night host and the next late night host, basically, because some guy is stepping down. It was such a fascinating season. And I love the way that this show tackles sexism, especially in the entertainment industry, because even though we made a lot of progress, and it's great to see how far women have come, there is still lots of work to be done. Women are judged very differently in the media. As we can see today, I think women get canceled for wearing a wrong outfit or saying one wrong thing, where men can be absolutely pieces of shit, and they're still accepted widely by the media. So it's crazy, but I also think that there is such a great setup to season 4 and season 3. One of my favorite episodes, though it's super tension-filled, it's less light and fun like the rest of the series. Deborah ends up getting the late night job, which is awesome. It's super great, but she doesn't name Ava her head writer. So after all this buildup, all of this tension, Deborah has named someone else the head writer so she can succeed in the network, basically, and get network approval before she moves forward. Ava then uses Deborah's cards against her and blackmails her into giving her the head writer position. And that's the season finale of season 3. So it's one of the most heartbreaking, but it's also really crazy to watch it all unfold. And then it sets the stage really funnily for season 4, because then they're working the late night show, the highest position they've each had in their entire lives, and they hate each other, so they can't rely on each other. Deborah starts pranking Ava. It's really, really fun. Season 4 is a fun one. I do think, though it's really funny, I like when the girls are working together. I like when Ava and Deborah are sharpening each other and making each other better. And Ava is really great, but I love it when they're working together. So when they're fighting, I'm kind of like, ugh. I would say season 4 is my least favorite just because they're fighting. But it's still a great season. Honestly, I would say there's not a bad episode. The writers really did their big one. It's amazing. Season 4, it's more about the power and betrayal. So she gets the late night role. Deborah is working as the late night host, first ever female host. It's amazing. They accomplish their shared goal of late night dominance and the demanding pressure of the industry. They take it all, and then all of a sudden, Ava makes one mistake. After Deborah pushes Ava to her limit, Ava kind of goes on a limb to cancel someone. I mean, ultimately, it's fine. But the network wants Deborah to fire Ava. So then Deborah fully announces that she's stepping down. And the network actually silences Deborah. They say she can't perform, she can't appear publicly anywhere because she is in contract with them. So she will only perform if it is with the late night team. However, the late night team is not to hear anymore because she already refused because she wants to keep Ava on as head writer. So season 5 is perfectly set up to cement Deborah's legacy. I loved season 5. It balanced the lightheartedness with this really emotional, what does having a legacy mean? How does that really impact the way you tell your story? How does that impact the way you interact with people? It's really powerful, especially for a character like Deborah Vance, to tell her own story, and then she wanted to end it on her own terms. So there is a storyline in season 5. So this is really giving away big spoilers if you haven't seen it. But there is a storyline in season 5 where Deborah chooses that she's going to end her own life. She has cancer, and she's already done this great comedy special. She's performed at Madison Square Garden and all of the things. She's done everything she wants to do, and she wants to end on a high. She goes to end her own life, and she wants to bring Ava because she wants Ava to be with her in her final days. They truly are best friends, and it's awesome to see, but it's also one of the hardest. Oh my gosh, I don't think I could do it. If my best friend asked me to go with them to end their life because they want to end it on a high instead of going to cancer treatment, that would be really, really, really tough. So thankfully, oh my gosh, if they ended up killing Deborah, I would have probably thought of the whole series very differently. But thankfully, Ava convinces her to stay, and Deborah wants to write another comedy hour with Ava, so that's how the show ends. Thank goodness. I was not prepared to say goodbye to Deborah Vance. I'm still not. I didn't even want the series to end, let alone have them kill off one of the main characters. Oh my gosh. I also wanted to say, I think it's really powerful that they have Ava swoop in and save Deborah's life again. She kind of already does when she gets her late night and revives her career, but in this, Deborah's still on a high, and they get to end the show on such a high. I don't know. It was such a good climactic moment. I do think the series goes through these ups and downs very effectively. They use the low moments to create the big moments and make them more emotional. And with this, they are saying goodbye to these characters because this is the last season. And so how do they effectively get the emotional punch as well as get the characters on board with saying goodbye? And I think that was a really, really good way to do it. So one of the biggest side plots of Hacks, and not even side plots, I don't want to say that, it's the main plots, but Jimmy is the manager, who is played by Paul W. Downs, and then Meg Stalter plays a character named Kayla, and the evolution of their friendship. Also, I think Hacks is, at the end of the day, a story of complicated work relationships that really can change and alter your life. You have, on one hand, Deborah Vance, a very powerful comedian, very much in the limelight, and then her writer, who is 40 years younger than her, Ava Daniels, who become best friends. But then, on the other hand, you have Paul W. Downs playing Jimmy, the manager, and then Kayla, who has never been a manager before, and Jimmy's dad has been a manager, so he's got legacy within the management community. He's got tons of clients, plenty of experience, and Kayla is this new, fresh perspective, much like Ava is a fresh perspective on comedy for Deborah. And it's very rare to see someone so secure in being very feminine as a man, but also being secure in his masculinity enough to be around so many powerful women. And so I loved watching Paul W. Downs. I felt like I was watching me if I was a manager. I really, really loved his character, and I love his relationship with Kayla. Kayla is played by Meg Stalter, who's definitely blowing up right now. She's having a moment. She's just this comedic force. No one I've ever seen has read lines like her or has performed like her. She has her own spin on the whole comedy thing, and I love it. I love it. I mean, she is a lesbian icon, if you will. She's almost all lesbian. I think she's bisexual, but I love her so much. She easily is one of the scene-stealing divas. They're all great in their own way. Those four main characters, I think, are perfect, and they end their arcs perfectly. In the end of Jimmy and Kayla's story, they end up taking over her dad's management. So Jimmy's father was a manager, and Kayla's dad owns a management firm. And in the very, very end of Hacks, Jimmy ends up taking over with Kayla as co-CEOs of Kayla's dad's company. And at first, you're like, how is this going to work? But honestly, I think that was the perfect ending to all of their stories. I have no notes, which is crazy. This is the Carpenter Critique, but I really don't have that many critiques. I love this show. I think the writers were so intentional about how they wrote each of their characters. Very emotionally intelligent writing. I think if I had to rank the seasons, it's so hard, but I'd probably go 2 as my favorite. I love when they're on the road. I really like season 5. Ooh, I might go 2, 3 because of the season finale, then 5 because I think 5 was just kind of a victory lap for the show. It's so good. And it's so funny. They keep the pace. They don't let anything up. It's really, really great. Oh, that makes me so, it's so sad to say like season 1 is 4th because I really like season 1, but I also think that was such a good foundation to build upon, and they were able to build such great seasons out of season 1. It's not that saying it's worse, it's just saying that it's definitely more of the foundation of the show. And in season 4 was where the big conflict came, so that's probably my last, but literally they're all so good. I seriously recommend watching the show. It is outstanding, and honestly, it has been nominated every year for Emmys, and I think Jean Smart has won the Emmy every year, and she's probably going to do it again. She absolutely deserves it. She devours this role. The cinematography is great too. I know, especially when they have their opening on each season, they try to do a foreshadowing of how the season is going to end. Like in season 3, they have a Deborah Vance impersonator walking in, and the first statue is Caesar falling from grace. Just like Ava Daniels is going to betray Deborah at the end of the season, they portray Caesar, who is about to be betrayed. So it's really, really cool. And I know in season 4, they do this reconciliation. It's all about power and betrayal, but it ends in the reconciliation of the two characters. And the first couple shots are kind of showing how starkly different it is and how they're going to come back together in the end. So it's a really intentional show. I love that the 3 writers, I've watched the behind the scenes of everything. And I'm a Hannah Einbinder fan. I am obsessed with her. I want to watch everything that she's in. I'm so excited to see where each of their careers are going to take them, because I know Jean Smart has had plenty and she has been starring in so much, and her career is filled with amazing things, but Hacks is such a crowning jewel for her, and I hope that she's able to continue. I mean, if she wants to, I'm power to her, whatever she wants to do, but honestly, it is so cool that she is still at the top of her game, and definitely later years of her life. She is performing nonstop. I honestly, if she performed a comedy trip, just in stand-up comedy throughout the country, I would absolutely buy a ticket. So, can't recommend this enough. I loved the show Hacks. I want to watch it over and over again. I am debating on watching it all the way through, but I maybe need to leave a little space for it. But without further ado, let's dive into the psychology article for the week. One thing about me is I love psychology, obviously. And the Carpenter Critique is an embodiment of that. But if I had to pick a topic to study within psychology that maybe I had to do a dissertation on or write a book on or something, maybe one day I'll do some research into it. But I would definitely pick generational differences. I am fascinated by how different events in history shape a whole generation's view on certain things. Like how the world wars have definitely affected the people in the boomer generation, how the world wars affected them and their generation, versus how 9/11 affected every single Gen Xer in America or people that were present in America. I also think it's interesting how millennials and Gen Z have reacted so differently to the internet. And there's the whole Gen Alpha and Gen Z that were in school during the pandemic. And so how are those generations going to be reacting to, say, when we have brand new technological advancements like the internet, like AI, like different world events happening. We have different presidents, and in rather formative times, Gen Z in our 20s right now, or Gen Alpha in their burgeoning teenage years, or millennials in their 30s and 40s. It's so interesting to see how the world shapes different generations. And sure, it's not meant to generalize and put people into boxes, but I do think it's funny that there is, depending on your age, you probably have some characteristics that relate to other people of your age because of certain events that happened in history. So I'm fascinated by generational differences. I am obsessed with especially something as simple as comedy or humor. I think it's still very fascinating to see how older people make jokes, or Gen Z with our internet humor, and millennials with their internet humor, that whole mustache tattoo phase, or cringe, how different generations have their different versions of cringe and what makes people uncomfortable. I'm fascinated. So anyway, naturally, I'm so interested in the show Hacks and the different generational comedy and how they clash. I've tried to find an article that represented this. So the article that I found is called "Does Your Humor Change as You Age?" Very simple title. This article discusses research that was conducted by Jennifer Tuhan Stanley at the University of Akron. This study examined whether people of different ages find different types of humor funny. So the main research question is, do young adults, middle-aged adults, and older adults laugh at the same kinds of jokes, or does humor preference change with age? Now, what do you think the freaking answer is? Of course it does. And it's going to change based on whatever generation. I think it changes from person to person, but if we're going to group in generations, absolutely, I think it changes, which is what the findings suggest. So the researchers want to know that question, and specifically they focused on the two different styles of humor. So they focused on aggressive humor, which is humor that involves making fun of someone, embarrassing another person, sarcasm or ridicule, or jokes at another person's expense. Examples were taken from shows such as Curb Your Enthusiasm or The Office. And then they also have affiliate humor. So there's aggressive humor and then affiliative humor. So affiliative humor is like humor that brings people together. You involve sharing your own awkward situations, maybe, or it creates a social bonding rather than humor that targets someone. Examples of this that are in TV are like The Golden Girls or Mr. Bean. Now, the method that the researchers did was they showed television sitcom clips to adults from 3 different age groups: young adults, middle-aged adults, and older adults. Participants watched scenes containing different forms of humor and then rated how funny they found the clips and how socially appropriate they believed the behavior to be. The researchers compared the reactions across the different age groups and found, one, that younger adults really enjoyed the aggressive humor more. So younger and middle-aged adults generally found that they laughed more at scenes where characters were insulting each other, someone was embarrassed, or humor came from social mistakes or ridicule. So shows like The Office fit a lot of the younger adult and middle-aged adult humor much better. Whereas the other finding was that older adults did not enjoy the aggressive humor as much. They much preferred the affiliative humor. So older adults were less amused by mean-spirited jokes, humiliation-based comedy, and mockery of others. They really liked the encouraged social connection that humor brought, involved shared experiences, and they focused on people navigating awkward situations together. So they really liked the kind of comedy that brought people together rather than targeting people, which I thought was rather interesting, but also it kind of makes sense. I feel like the younger generation is really focused on the comedy that kind of makes fun of someone, but there is a very self-deprecation to it as well. Okay, so why do we think this happened? The study does not definitively answer this question, but the researchers proposed 2 different possibilities. One, that aging changes what we value. So as people change and as people age, they may become more emotionally focused, more relationship-oriented, and less interested in conflict and social dominance. As a result, humor based on connection may become far more rewarding than humor based on ridicule. The other possibility is that it's just natural generational differences. So the researchers could not determine whether humor changes because people age, or today's older adults just belong to generations that were raised with different comedy preferences. This remains an open question, and the study does challenge the idea that humor is universal, which I really like, but it also suggests that what people find funny is very influenced by your age. Comedy audiences may respond differently to the same joke, obviously, and social and emotional priorities may shape humor preferences throughout adulthood, which I totally get. Of course, I don't want to group people into just their own generation being their definitive quality, but I do think it is interesting to note that if you find something funny that a lot of old people find funny, or if you're older and you find a lot of things funny that are a part of the younger generation, maybe it's interesting or important to note why. Why do you find the things that you find funny, funny? I do think there were several limitations in this study, such as they really only used TV clips and sitcom clips. I think if we dove into it more, maybe we could have different comedians go from different generations and see what type of humor they gravitate towards. And then maybe just having people openly and honest talk about the things that they find funny. We could bring in some interview-based questions as opposed to just observational questions about TV. But I do think it was a really good idea for a study, and I would be glad to see where future research ends up. So some other directions that they thought they could go for future research is whether an individual's humor preferences actually change as they age. So if they study just one individual or a few individuals as they age and see if they still find the same things funny. The role of culture and generation in shaping humor would be a great study. Why older adults increasingly prefer affiliative humor as opposed to aggressive. Lastly, they would like to look into whether emotional development explains changing humor preferences. So, in a takeaway from the study, we found that young and middle-aged adults tend to enjoy aggressive and teasing humor more, whereas older adults prefer affiliative humor and humor that emphasizes shared experiences and social connection. Interestingly, Hacks off the rip gives us a very opposite end of the spectrum, because we have Deborah Vance, who is a rather aggressive humor person to start. But it's all about her character development, because Deborah Vance, though she's older, she comes from a generation of women, female comedians specifically, that had to fight their way through the industry. So one of the reasons that Hacks works so well is that it essentially dramatizes the exact phenomenon described in this article. Different generations often find different things funny, and the series centers around this relationship between Deborah Vance and Ava Daniels, whose comedy styles are very different and reflect their age-related humor preferences identified by the researchers. Though Deborah Vance is older, she views comedy as survival, and we see this progression of her character to start. Like I said earlier, Deborah comes from a generation of women who had to fight for every opportunity in stand-up comedy. Throughout the series, she repeatedly argues that female comics of her era survived by being tougher, sharper, and more fearless than everyone around them. And you can see that in her character. In Jean Smart's performance, she is tough, and she uses comedy as this shield. So her comedy style is built on insult humor, roasts, sarcasm, and observational jokes that are really aimed at people's flaws. From the study's perspective, Deborah's aggressive humor is much less about preference and more about adaptability. She learned comedy in an industry where being soft could mean disappearing. Psychologically, Deborah uses humor as armor. Her jokes create distance from her painful experiences, like her husband's betrayal, like her career setbacks, the loneliness she feels in her success, and the aging in an ageist industry. Audience laugh, but Deborah is often protecting herself with the jokes that she tells. So when we have someone like Ava Daniels come in, our Gen Z millennial voice, Ava represents the new generation of comedy. So people who grew up online and comedians who came up with the internet often are much more interested in comedy about identity, comedy about vulnerability and relationships. There's also a lot of social justice in comedy nowadays, especially with people on the internet, and there's a significant amount of personal storytelling that comes from comedy. Ava's comedy often comes from self-disclosure rather than attacking others like Deborah's is. This aligns interestingly with the other side of the study. So Ava's humor is a lot more affiliative, which is what the older people preferred in the study. And Deborah's comedy is a lot more aggressive, which is what the younger people preferred in comedy. So I think already that's a really psychologically fascinating premise for a show. And I love that Hacks is able to play around with this dynamic. And arguably it stays fresh for the entire 5 seasons of the show. Even in the very end, there is this difference between Deborah's more aggressive take on comedy, and Ava's much more, I wouldn't say lighthearted, but I would say it's much more social justice oriented and much more about personal storytelling. Ava embodies something that the study didn't really address, which is internet era humor. She belongs to a generation, Gen Z and millennials, that often mixes vulnerability with irony, activism, and self-deprecation. So the conflict is so interesting because they both think each other's take on humor is so fundamentally wrong. So Ava and Deborah don't really prefer each other's styles. Deborah thinks Ava's comedy is too sensitive, too political, too focused on image, whereas Ava thinks Deborah's comedy is very outdated, needlessly cruel, and insensitive to modern audiences. From a psychological perspective, both women are defending the humor style that they believe is correct, but the biggest, I would say, progression and change, like what really motivates the show to be so much better, is that we see Deborah's perspective change because her comedy style becomes a lot more personal and she uses it to tell her story and open up vulnerably, as opposed to her previous style, which was more aggressive. She kind of switches into this using her power for good, I would say. And Ava brings that out of her. But also, Deborah does challenge Ava's entitledness. So though Ava believes that she's right in her comedy style, I think Deborah pushes back in a way that makes Ava rethink, right, I do need to consider other generations, and I do need to consider how I approach it, because my style doesn't work for everybody, and Deborah wants to make her work for everybody. It's a really fascinating, you guys have to watch it. I really, really recommend it. So, as the series progresses, like I said, Deborah's comedy gradually shifts. She starts incorporating personal stories. She starts incorporating emotional honesty, self-reflection, and also genuine vulnerability. Instead of simply making fun of others, she begins making meaning out of her own experiences. In other words, Deborah slowly moves towards the kind of relationship-centered humor that the research suggests older adults increasingly appreciate. So what Hacks ultimately teaches us about humor is that the show's final message is not that one generation is funnier than another. Instead, Hacks suggests that great comedy emerges when generations learn from each other. Deborah teaches Ava discipline, craftsmanship, and resilience to the things that are harder in life. And Ava teaches Deborah vulnerability, cultural awareness, and emotional authenticity. By the end of the series, neither woman fully abandons their original style. Instead, they create a hybrid form of comedy that combines Deborah's fearlessness with Ava's emotional openness. Their relationship evolves from a generational culture war into a creative partnership built on mutual respect. I'm proud of myself. I made all these notes and everything. That sounded really good. Okay, so to conclude, viewed through the lens of this university study, Hacks becomes more than a comedy about comedians. It is a psychological exploration of how humor changes across generations. Deborah Vance represents a generation that learned to use comedy as protection and power. Ava comes from a generation that uses comedy for connection and self-expression. The brilliance of Hacks is showing that neither approach is sufficient alone. The healthiest form of humor, and perhaps the healthiest form of aging, is not choosing between Deborah's sharpness or Ava's vulnerability. It is learning how to laugh with people rather than merely at them, while still having the courage to tell uncomfortable truths. That balance is what ultimately makes both women better comedians and better human beings, and overall makes the show a ton more insightful than we've seen before. Because Hacks is so psychologically interesting and pushes on this generational conflict, it makes it all the more rewarding, because when they're able to come together and create a comedy style that works for both of them, it makes it work for everybody. I know myself, I've been inspired by the show, and it challenges me to be funnier, and I try to not only incorporate what I learned from the show, but also it helped me have an open mind to other generational humor. I think I'd probably lean more myself to personal storytelling for humor and self-deprecation. And it's probably a lot of the internet in me. But I also want to have an appreciation for all different types of humor. And I think this show really opened my mind to see that humor can really shape people, especially the harder experiences that they've been through. I encourage everybody to read this study. I will link the article in my YouTube video below. But I'm also wanting to say thank you so much for listening, and I hope you go watch Hacks. It is a brilliant show Thank you so much for watching The Carpenter Critique or listening to The Carpenter Critique. If you want to follow me on any socials, at The Carpenter Critique is my user for every single social media platform, except for Twitter, which I am at Carpenter Critic. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you so much, everybody. I will see you next week for a very special episode. Oh, should I just say it? I'll see you next week for an episode about Euphoria. Okay. All right. Bye. Thank you.